Waters. I'm your host, Dane Waters, broadcasting again from Asia. As you see in the can't even talk today. So let's just try this again. This is a live show, so I don't get the option of editing that out. But the reality is that is Taipei 101 there in the background. So, it's all beautiful. But let's talk about what's happening around the world. I know every time I do a show, people say I'm going to say something to get in trouble. So what's happening around the world is, let's talk about Charlie Kirk and let's talk about Israel. Okay, those are the two things that, real quick, that if you say the wrong thing, you're getting in trouble. But I'm going to try not to get in trouble, which is always difficult for me. The assassination of Charlie Kirk, let me make it very, 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 very clear, is an abomination. No one should be murdered, assassinated for their political beliefs, no matter what they are. It's absolutely, especially in America, shouldn't happen. Shouldn't happen anywhere in the world. But what's interesting is that, this is a perfect example of how it's very difficult living in a society where people cannot have conversations from the right and the left to talk about it. I mean, that's the issue. It's not, whether he's controversial or not, or, whether he should be, well, once again, he should never have been assassinated. But I see, Delta Airlines is firing pilots, firing stewardesses. MSNBC is firing people. Washington Post are firing people. Anybody making any post of any kind about the Charlie Kirk assassination are being fired. So it's very difficult to have a conversation about it. And the same is happening with Israel. Israel today started their ground incursion into Gaza. And, I've had many, many guests on the show from the IDF and others to talk about it. But the reality is, it's another, you can't have a conversation about the Palestinians, Hamas, which is a hideous, they need to be gone out of this world. There's no doubt about it. But if you try to talk about the Palestinians and Israel and a two-state solution, it's very difficult to have that conversation. My point is that we need to figure out how, as a world, to have open communication about these issues. They're difficult. They're not comfortable by any stretch of the imagination. But if we don't find a way, especially in the United States, to start talking about them in a way that we can bring people together, the division is going to continue. And not only is division going to continue, I think violence on both sides is going to continue. And globally, violence is going to continue and rise. And it's just not a good recipe for the future of our society. Anyway, so I'll leave it at that because we have a lot to talk about on this show. So let's take a quick break and we'll be back with our first guest. Thank you. Welcome back to Around the World with Dane Waters. So on that somber note of my introduction, let's get to even more interesting stuff. So we're very honored once again to have Stephanie Barello with us. She's an economist, and I was joking with her that she's the most famous economist I know. Actually, she's the only economist I know, so I guess that's true. I'm kidding with you, Stephanie. No, really, listen, we've talked about this before when you were on the show before, is that when it comes to economics, I am totally clueless. Absolutely clueless. And I will tell you, after our last show, when you tried to explain your tariffs and how they work and all that kind of stuff, I got a lot of people saying, hey, she made it simple for me to understand. So I appreciate that.
Oh.
And that's why I have you back on the show.
Well, thanks, Dane. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, U.S. economy. Let's start with a basic thing. Where do you feel the economy is? I mean, do you think that the U.S., you have President Trump on one hand talking about it's a great economy. Other people say it's not. You got Jamie Dimon from saying different things, Warren Buffett saying different things. But help us understand, where is the U.S. economy right now?
So the way that I know where the U.S. economy is at is I look at the data that the government is releasing. So there are a couple of figures that people really pay attention to. One of them is what's called the jobs report. That is the report released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, on the first Friday of every single month. And it is probably, in my mind, the most watched indicator in the economy. And so make my judgments based on that report. I look at another report released by BLS about inflation. And then I also look at data released by other statistical agencies like the Bureau of Economic Analysis about GDP. So that said, here's my take on the most recent job numbers. And I will say this with a grain of salt, though, is when I look at the numbers, I do know that on a month-to-month basis, the numbers can be kind of noisy and you don't really know what's going on until you have several months of data, right? And so, but that being said, the last couple of months of data, at least on the jobs front, isn't looking great. So let me give you a little bit of background about how this data is collected. And so here's my professor hat about what happens um, behind the scenes because I actually worked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That was my first job out of college when I worked as an economist in Washington, D.C. And I learned a lot. I saw behind the curtain. I was there. So I can attest to what the culture is like, how the data is collected, and everything. So when it comes to the jobs report, what BLS does is they want to get a pulse of what's happening in the economy. And there are millions of workers and there's millions of businesses in the United States. And obviously, it would be really hard for BLS to ask all of us and say, hey, do you have a job right now? Or are you looking for one? And that's really hard. So they can't ask millions of Americans that every single month. So what they do is they have surveys. And so they have one survey where they ask a bunch of households. They ask them about their participation in the labor force and their employment status. And then, so I think they interview 60,000 households every single month for that. And then separately, they go out and they survey tens of thousands of businesses as well, and they get like payroll jobs. So from the household survey, we will get the unemployment rate, we'll get data on the labor force, and then from the business side, that's where we will get data on the number of jobs that have been added or lost in the U.S. economy in a given month. So that's a little bit of background on the two surveys, and I will give you some highlights from. And interrupt me, by the way, anytime if you have any questions. Um, so
I feel
here's
like
the
I'm in
most.
class. I'm not allowed to interrupt the professor. I mean, it's the professor. So go
Oh,
ahead,
you
professor.
can, you can. So the most recent data for the jobs report came out first Friday of the month, and that's where we got information about what was happening in August in the U.S. economy. And the numbers aren't looking great. So the preliminary estimates are that 22,000 jobs were added to the U.S. economy in the month of August, and that is relatively weak. You also, okay, actually, I'll get to a point about revisions in a little bit. But if you want to get an idea of what does 22,000 jobs added in August mean? So as a comparison point, last year, monthly job growth on average was like 168,000. Granted, that fluctuated a lot, but that was the monthly average. In January, the jobs added was 111,000. So these numbers are really quite weak. And this number it's not entirely surprising, but it was lower than expectations. I looked at the data by industry because you can look at not just the overall jobs numbers, but you can drill down and say, okay, well, what industries are adding jobs and which industries are losing jobs? And what's interesting is that the economy added 22,000 jobs, but that is being there are industries that are losing jobs that are being masked by industries that are gaining jobs. Does that make sense? So that's a net
Yeah, yeah.
number. So most of the jobs added in the US economy, and frankly, since the beginning of this year, have come from only a couple of big industries like healthcare, education, and leisure and hospitality. Every other industry in the United States, and as I looked at the numbers for the month of August, are losing jobs. You have construction, you have mining, you have professional and business services, you obviously have the federal government. So that is not great when you have a smaller fraction of industries that are actually contributing to job growth in the United States.
Well,
And the last, yeah,
let me interrupt you real quick. So real quick before we go any further on that, President Trump fired the head of the BLS
yep.
because he claimed that the numbers were erroneous, the numbers were made up, or whatever words he. So let's digress. Let's take that for a quick second. Then I want to come back to the specifics because you're talking about all these numbers. And I've always heard these numbers. Like we gained 150,000 jobs, lost jobs, whatever. This is my entire life. I've heard this.
Hmm.
But it was President Trump right in firing the director?
Sorry, I'm trying to phrase this correctly. If his reason for firing the BLS commissioner was because the numbers have politicized, then that's incorrect. And I can say that because I worked there. The culture for being nonpartisan there is extremely strong. We had a saying when you worked there, and it's that when it comes to data about the economy, the glass is neither half full nor half empty. It has 50% air and 50% water. We really valued just telling the numbers as it was and not putting any political spin on it. And then we put our heads in the sand and let, everybody else spin the numbers, whatever. But our job was just to give the numbers. And we knew that if we were partisan or perceived to be partisan, nobody could trust our numbers, right? Like that's the whole reason why BLS is legitimate. We know that there's statistical agencies in other countries who mess with their numbers for political purposes, and no one trusts them, right? The public doesn't trust them, other countries don't trust them. So that standard is really important. And I can say that that type of thinking permeated the way we collected data and analyzed it and processed it and communicated it. We had to be very careful in how we even introduced the numbers. We couldn't say, oh, the unemployment rate soared to 10%. Instead, we would say it increased to 10%, just as plain as possible. So, yeah, so BLS is not politicized, and I can say that having been there myself.
Okay, so let me ask this. So once again, I'm going to ask you questions. If you don't feel comfortable answering, of course, you can say no, Dane. Which I hear no, Dane a lot in my life, so it's not shocking. Especially when I propose, it's always no, Dane, no, Dane, no, Dane. I hear that a lot. But so in the BLS, do you think that President Trump knew that the numbers were going to go down, and so somehow he wanted to undermine the credibility of the BLS so that now he can say, hey, it's only 22,000, but the numbers are sketchy anyway, so don't believe it? Or do you think that there's any merit? This is something I've heard. Do you think there's any merit in that?
Any merit that, I mean, I don't know what's going on in his head and his strategy. I have no idea. So I do know that I do know that BLS numbers have not made presidents happy in the past. So it's not so in other words, like BLS has been challenged before politically, and it's always has weathered the episode. So for example, during the Nixon administration, they obviously weren't happy with the numbers coming out of BLS, and so they sent someone to BLS to count the number of Jews that worked there because they believed that they were spinning the numbers against the president. And we learn about this episode when we work at BLS and when we're training, and we learn just about how there may be political pressures, but you have to do your job no matter what and do it best, regardless with what's happening politically. So yeah, like I said, I can't say what's going on in his head, but I do know that there's, at least internally, the culture to resist politicization.
Well, you're definitely very, you said it in a very nice way, the response
And
was.
because I was
Yeah.
trained that way, like even now, I still get extremely nervous to speak publicly because that's just not how I was trained. I'm like, nope, you have to say, just give all the data and let other people make the decision and the value judgment. So it still is like part of my psyche for sure.
Okay, so let's go back to the numbers professor, the numbers professor.
Okay.
I'll be your Gilligan, you'll be the professor. How's that? We'll play Gilligan's Island here.
Okay.
That dated me. I'm sure it did date me. But by the way, do you even know what Gilligan's Island is? Have you ever heard of Gilligan's Island?
Yeah, I think yes, I've heard of
You
it.
think so? Oh my God, I really am old. Oh my God. I was around when BLS was carving data into stone tablets, apparently. Um, but so the hardcore numbers. So the number, unemployment or employment numbers are going down. Let's talk about. Well, actually, I'm going to totally switch gears on you and throw you a curveball here. Tariffs. We talked about tariffs before,
Hmm.
because it just pops into my head. So before the courts right now, it's before the U.S. Supreme Court now about whether or not these tariffs are constitutional or not. Lower courts have said they're not constitutional, right? So now I'll get back to the employment numbers here in a second, BLS. But if the U.S. Supreme Court rules that tariffs are unconstitutional and that he can't do that, what does that mean? What does that happen? Does that mean that we owe money to people? Do we give money back, or what happens?
I mean, I'm not sure how what the implementation would happen, but I believe for businesses that they would be able to relax a lot more and have a lot more certainty when it comes to their planning. Yeah, I know people who just had to pay the tariff, right? And they didn't have time to substitute the supply chain, or they didn't want to because they didn't have the right options in the United States. So, yeah, we will see how what exactly happens.
Well, okay, so do you think that these employment numbers, what is the tariff, have the tariffs impacted employment and has been a cause for the lower numbers in the country?
I haven't seen. anybody specifically, and I'm sure it's actually out there, and I should look it up. I haven't seen anyone quantify the effect yet of tariff uncertainty on job growth in the United States, but that has definitely been part of the conversation. Whenever I'm hearing economists digest these job numbers, that's a huge explanation for why job growth is slowing down, is because of the uncertainty with tariffs and how that impacts the willingness of businesses to, say, hire new employees. Because businesses, they are more reluctant to hire new people than they are to fire someone, right? And so they kind of pause on hiring people when things are uncertain with their business and their revenues, and it impacts their ability to invest in new technology or engage in capital expenditures, etc. So I have heard that as being a part of the story. I've heard also, but I don't know the degree of quantification. There is inflation as well, but that is correlated with tariffs. So that can be hard to disentangle. And then there's also the immigration story and what's happening in particular industries as immigration policies have gotten more strict, and that has impacts on, say, like leisure and hospitality, agriculture, and so forth, construction
Okay,
as well.
so let's talk about inflation for a second. Is there inflation in the United States?
Yeah, so the most recent numbers were released on last Thursday. And yes, so the number that people look at when it comes to inflation is how much has inflation increased relative to what it was a year ago. And so those numbers are for August were 2.9%. And to give you an idea to put that in scale, that's running a little warm on the inflation front for sure. It's not the direction that we like to see it go. Another related indicator of inflation that the Federal Reserve tracks is called the PCE. Don't worry about it, the PCE deflator, but they target 2%. And so you can see that is running warm relative to where the Fed would like to have interest rates at.
Okay, so all of this. Okay, so here's the
Or
next
inflation
question.
at,
So,
sorry, not interest rates.
well, and so okay, so inflation. Let's go back to the numbers you were talking about the job growth. It's interesting that you talk about how the numbers in construction is down. That means that people are not investing in infrastructure, investing in tangible things. I mean, it was surprising to talk about hospitality industry increasing, considering that
Hmm.
I would argue that travel to the United States is diminished. So if you take those industry sectors, which one surprised you the most as far as being up or down?
I mean, I would have to look at the whole time series for every single one to get a full sense of the context of it. But and I know certain sectors are more volatile than others, but anytime you see investment related industries like construction, that's when you think, oh, that's not really great, right? And because the those kind of sectors can be leading indicators of recessions.
Okay, and so okay, let's talk about recession. Give us a little class on helping us understand exactly what is the definition of a recession and why should we be worried about it.
Right. So there's kind of the back of the envelope estimate of recessions, and then there's the official designation of recessions. The back of the envelope one is that your GDP contracts, like I think it's two consecutive quarters or something, or yes. And but the official designation is is established by this nonprofit organization, NBER, where they look at a whole bunch of data points. They look at jobs and consumer spending and GDP and all sorts of things, and they come together and they say this is when the recession started. And what's difficult with recessions is that they can often spiral, right? Like you may have something that constrains the US economy, but as those people lose jobs, then they don't spend at the businesses that they attend, going to the restaurants, going to the movies, painting, doing a home upgrade project in their house. And as they spend less money, then that means that other people lose jobs and it can kind of spiral. And what is interesting when it comes to recession is that the most recent jobs report, one thing I didn't mention is that whenever they release the data on jobs, they also will revise the last couple of months prior, just as new data has come in. This is standard, it's publicized. And what actually happened is in June, their revised estimates said that the U.S. economy actually lost, I think it's 13,000 jobs in the month of June, which hasn't happened in a really long time. The last time that the U.S. lost jobs in a given month was during 2020. We can all forgive that episode, right? Before that, it was 2010. So it's actually been
Oh,
a
wow.
long time since the U.S. economy has lost jobs in a given month. So there are definitely some warning signs. I think it's Moody's Analytics, they have put the odds of a recession happening at 48%, which is uncomfortably high. So yeah, there's definitely these signs that one could be coming, but we'll see. I mean, if but things could always change, right? On the tariff front. Yeah, so we will see what happens, and we'll see what happens over the next subsequent months of data releases.
Well, this is so because this is really fascinating, really, and it's just okay. So here's the next question for you. If America goes into a recession, what are the global implications to that?
I mean, when they say that, what's the phrase? Is it when America sneezes, the whole rest of the world gets a cold? So
Yeah, something like that. Yes.
something like that. I mean, we're all integrated, right, in our global economy. So for sure, there are implications in terms of it impacts other countries for sure and their economic growth. And so, yes, I can't say the degree of impact, but it's definitely there. And so, like when you look at, say, the financial crisis, with what's happening in the United States with the housing market, you saw how that spread throughout the world, right? And how it challenged growth in a lot of countries.
Okay, well, we have 1 minute left here, so here's your prediction. You can be Nostradamus for a second and
Oh,
say, look, yeah, you're not held accountable for any of this, by the way.
okay, good.
We'll bleep out whatever you don't want us to say. Um, hold on, let me just tell this guy, stand. My next guest is getting really antsy. Stand by. Coming to you. There we go. Coming to you. So the question is, if you look a year in advance, 2 years, 5 years, whatever you say, where do you think America's headed economically based upon the current economic strategy of the United States?
Oh, that's a good question. The current economic strategy of the United States is very challenging for economic growth. So, if the uncertainty and the volatility in policy approaches persists, it's not great for the U.S. economy. And I've heard lots of economists say this on the right and the left. The policies just are not conducive to economic growth and how the economy functions today, especially as we are all interconnected to each other worldwide.
That's a very diplomatic answer, as always, for you. Stephanie Barello, economist, a global extraordinaire. Listen, I really, truly appreciate it. It's always fun to have you on the show, and I can see, you're training the future economists of the world, and they're very lucky to have you. I can say that with all certainty. So, thanks for being with us today on Around the World with Dane Waters, and I will talk to you again soon. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with our next guest.
All right. Thanks, Dane.